After more than 100 days of conflict, the U.S. and Iran have reached an agreement to end fighting and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, set for final signage. That deal Friday in Switzerland. Stage 1 includes reopening the strait and allowing time to remove the mines. Stage 2 reshapes power in the Middle East by limiting Tehran's weapon capabilities. All this is pushing oil way down this morning. You have WTI at $80.37 a barrel. Oil traffic is expected to flow freely once again as nearly a quarter of the world's oil passes through that critical waterway. It's been essentially stuck for over 3 months. Kepler is estimating 500 large commercial vessels currently trapped in the Gulf. Well, they can now get out. They can move their oil, and empty ones can get back in to fill up. But delayed ships will need time to complete their voyages, Kepler says, and return for new loadings. And they say that process could take up to 3 months. Meanwhile, President Trump right now on his way to France for the G7 summit, where the Iran deal will likely top the agenda with European leaders. He will first be greeted by Emmanuel Macron, followed by a working dinner. Joining me now is former Trump State Department Senior Advisor and Center for National Interest Senior Fellow, Christian Whiton. Christian, good morning to you. I mean, your thoughts on the Iran deal and what they're going to say about it at the G7 today?
Well, I think it's good. Oil prices will come down, and eventually gasoline prices will come down, hopefully below an average of $4 a gallon. But I think there are a lot of questions. The Iranians don't actually see this deal, which isn't a deal. It's a vague memorandum of understanding that paves the way for further negotiations, during which the Iranians will do what the Iranians probably always do, which is prevaricate, delay, lie, steal, and then Donald Trump is going to have to decide whether he's going to go back to military force or accept something that's a lot like the Obama-era Iran nuclear deal. He's accomplished some very significant things in Iran, most importantly by destroying the centrifuges to the extent they weren't destroyed in military actions last year against Iran. He never explained really what the difference was, and I don't think many people believe we were truly at the precipice of nuclear war, having been told last year that we set them back so much. Anyway, when you go to the G7, they're going to be happy. The Iranians are happy. The Europeans have always been against dealing harshly with Iran. They tried to work against maximum pressure in the first Trump campaign, but I don't know if you really want France's president or the highly unpopular Prime Minister of UK, who's going to be ousted from power pretty soon, or the German government, all of whom were against us throughout this entire thing, slap you on the back for a deal that's not great.
So you think this deal is not great. And do you think there's more negotiation to be made between now and Friday? That's why we haven't seen what's in it. That's why we don't have the signing ceremony yet?
I don't know. It's a question of who's going to sign this for the Iranian. Originally, there was talk of a digital signature, perhaps, so their dead supreme leader might be able to sign it in some sort of weekend at Bernie's scenario. So we'll see who's up and if he's able to use a pen, because we really haven't gotten a proof of life from who's in charge of Iran. And yeah, well, that's sort of to be determined.
Christian, that's a good point, but there are reports that there will be a burial, a ceremony for the former Ayatollah this week in Iran. To me, that shows they're confident.
It does. It's interesting, you know, you have to remember the Tiananmen Square uprising in China in 1989 was the result of a burial of a regime figure. Sometimes that does create some risk for political turbulence. Obviously, the Iranians very much attuned to this. You know, if you just step back, they're in a strong political position. The president started this war by saying Iranians rise up, but they haven't done that, nor have we taken any simple steps to make that happen. Trump is once again friends with Elon Musk, now the world's first trillionaire. They could have been jamming Starlink terminals, putting them into the hands of dissidents in Iran, taking other steps to promote a dissent movement, seem to do nothing of that step. And so Trump arrives, you know, somewhat frankly politically weakened when he gets to Paris this week.
Meanwhile, Barack Obama is casting doubt on any deal President Trump does reach, suggesting it might not be much different from what he did during his time as president. Listen here, and then I'll get your reaction, Christian.
It is doubtful that any agreement that arises is going to be significantly different or a significant improvement from the deal that we had in the first place and had worked for a long stretch of time before the United States pulled out of it. the notion that we can just bully our way or bomb our way to solutions may sometimes seem appealing, but the fact of the matter is that taking the time to explore diplomacy and exhaust the possibilities of coming up with deals that don't solve 100% of the problem, but solve 80, 90% of the problem, while avoiding the necessity of going to war.
Yeah, but Christian, there are differences between this potentially and the JCPOA, like no sunset clauses, like a verification mechanism, no payment until you prove that you're living up to the deal. What are your thoughts?
That's right. This deal is very different. But again, President Trump and J.D. Vance, who's been his point man on this, the one who's urged diplomacy and brought Pakistan and Qatar to the fore of this as our buddies, really haven't explained it. The payola is there, actually. Now, it's not going to be pallets of cash, which is what Obama sent to the Iranians as an inducement to sign the deal. But the belief on Capitol Hill that I have from usually reliable sources that $12 billion in sanctions relief will be released just for saying we have a deal. It's not going to be conditioned on removal of the nuclear dust or anything. So, you know, Trump should explain that the means of enriching the HEU, the centrifuge cascades, those are destroyed. It's sensitive equipment. That's a big deal. And that's a difference between the Obama deal, which enshrined Iran's nuclear program by letting them have the means of enrichment and by sunsetting. But it takes more than a couple of social media tweets and some desultory press conferences to get this across.
Christian, your sources are telling you that $12 billion will be unfrozen immediately without conditions. Is that correct?
That the Capitol Hill's belief is that, let me put it this way, that it may not be tomorrow, it may not be a single wire transfer, but throughout the course of negotiations over the next 60 days, we still don't actually have the text of the MOU, that there's an expectation that sanctions relief must occur promptly.
Yeah,
now
but
that could take the form of just releasing funds of oil that's already on the water, but that is cash to the regime, not pallets of cash, but sanctions relief. And it's, again, if you look at how this is being described in Tehran and in Jerusalem and here, very different understandings of what this agreement means.
But the White House also knows that they do not want Iran to get a nuclear weapon, not now, but not in the future, when the president or a Republican is no longer in control.
Yep, that's the plan. They agreed to it. They also agreed to that with Obama. They broke that agreement. So the nice thing is here, again, the means of doing so, of enriching uranium, and they don't really have a plutonium program, that's gone. So we should emphasize that. And if we need to go back and mow the lawn, if you will, because we see them reconstituting it, we can always do that.
Christian, thank you so much. Christian Whiton, everybody.